Everybody uses a different set of camera settings, and you can actually learn quite a bit by looking at how people set up their cameras. There might be tips and tricks, things you pick up. One person does something this way and you're like, oh, that might work pretty good. So today I'm going to show you how I set up my A7 III, all the menus, how everything is assigned in the camera, all the custom buttons, custom dials, how to change all that stuff. It's probably going to be quite a long video, so go grab a beer and put your feet up and let's get going. Oh, and today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. We'll talk more about them in a bit. Now I have broken this video down into 3 sections. The first is general settings for the A7 III that I use, everything in the menus. The second is the custom buttons that I use and why. And then the third is the custom dials. Now I'm sure there's gonna be some things that I just gloss over, settings that I don't necessarily use. If that does happen, it's not because they're not useful, it's just that I don't use them. It doesn't mean you might not, but I just don't use them, okay? Good, let's get on with the video. Everyone says Sony menus are pretty complicated, and I agree and disagree. For a new person who has come from something like Canon, they're definitely confusing, but once you wrap your head around it, you figure out where everything is, you get used to it pretty quick. It's just one of those things that the only way to get better is to use it more and more. Let's just jump straight into the menus. All the menus are separated out by tabs, and then within each tab there is more tabs. It's kind of why people get confused with Sony, but let's get going straight away. So file format for photos, RAW and JPEG. Now you can just shoot JPEG if you want, but I shoot everything in RAW. I don't really even ever use the JPEGs. The reason for this is RAW enables you to just fix so much in post. RAW basically takes a set of every settings possible, and you can change those after the fact with little to no quality loss, and you just have a lot more flexibility. I also go with raw uncompressed. There is a lot of debate as to whether it really makes so much difference, but uncompressed is technically a higher quality image. You can go compressed and save a ton of space, and really there isn't that much difference, but I still choose to go with the maximum I can. JPEG quality is extra fine, even though I don't ever use the JPEGs. If I wanted to, for whatever reason, if I'm sending it from my camera to my phone or something like that, that's why I use extra fine. There are other options in there, fine and standard. I've only ever used extra fine. JPEG image size, large is 24 megapixels. Now you see in here that you also have medium and small. I don't know why you'd ever want to use the others, but I only ever use large. And aspect ratio is very important. You want to make sure, if you want to capture the most out of your sensor, that you're shooting in 3:2. If we change to 16:9, you'll see that the megapixels there for JPEGs drops to 20. That's now your max. So you're just losing some of your sensor there. So always shoot in 3:2, 24 megapixels. You can always just crop to 16:9 after the fact if you wanted to. So that's a big tip for you. aps-c/super 35. So it's on auto right now. Basically, if you attach a lens that's an APS-C lens to your full frame camera, the camera will detect it and it'll automatically put you into crop mode. If you don't want that to happen, then you can put it to manual, but you're gonna have a lot of vignetting if you're using a crop lens on a full frame camera. So that's what I use for that. Let's go to number 2. Long exposure noise reduction I have on. So if you're taking a long exposure, the camera's gonna attempt to reduce any noise if there is any in there. And then high ISO noise reduction, you can probably guess what that is. If you're shooting something like Astro and you've got a slightly higher ISO on there, it's gonna try and reduce some of the noise created from shooting at a higher ISO. But I would turn that off, especially if you're shooting something like Astro, because sometimes it will just delete stars, thinking that's noise. So you don't want to use that. Color space for me is always sRGB. You do have another option there, Adobe RGB, but I always go with sRGB. Lens compensation. You don't need to touch that. Let's just take a moment to thank today's sponsor, which is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes for creative people like you and I. You can explore new skills or deepen knowledge on hobbies that you already have. Skillshare offers classes designed for real life. So we're pretty busy in our lives on a daily basis. So when you want to just sit down and learn something or take a class, you can at your own leisure. There is a ton of filmmaking and photography classes, which I have talked about a lot before, and I'll put a playlist down below if you are interested in those. But today I want to take a little bit of a different turn and talk to you about another passion of mine, pizza. So something you may not know about me is I really like to cook. And since we've all been locked away for a long time, I've been trying to perfect the art of making a really good homemade pizza. Pizza is one of those things that's actually pretty easy to make if you have the proper ingredients, but more importantly, a solid recipe. And let me tell you, I found a couple of courses on Skillshare that really do nail the recipe. Nick Anderer is an owner and chef at a restaurant in New York City and has a course called How to Make the Perfect Thin Pizza Crust. If you're interested in pizza, which I'm pretty sure is everybody, you need to take this course. One of the craziest things I took away from this is how little ingredients you actually need to make a solid, amazing pizza crust. Flour, water, yeast. That's it. There's all these elaborate recipes out there with tons of ingredients, but what he shows you is that you just don't really need those. Anyway, you can probably tell I'm pretty passionate about pizza, but this is definitely a class that is worth watching.
If you like eating pizza, then you should know a little bit about making pizza, because I think that it's a fun process to go through. Anybody can learn this. I mean, I think that you can teach this to a 12-year-old kid. You can also teach it to a 35-year-old experienced cook. So if you like pizza, you're gonna like this class.
The first 1,000 of you to click the link in the description below will get a 2-month free trial of premium membership, so you can explore all the courses available and get to enjoy a really great pizza. Also, the nice thing about Skillshare is everything is created for learning, so there is no ads, and an annual subscription is really affordable, works out to be less than $10 a month, which is the equivalent of like 2 of those frozen store-bought nasty cardboard tasting pizzas. So just don't get those and make a good pizza. All right, back to the video. Drive mode, single shooting. So this is where if you hold down the trigger or when you push the trigger, sorry, the shutter, it's going to specify how the camera behaves. So single shooting, if you push it once, it's just gonna click and fire 1 photo. High is, so if you're holding the trigger, it's gonna go, if you're on low, it's gonna go if you're gonna go high plus, it's going the quickest frames per second you can get. High is gonna be a little bit slower. You get the idea. I only ever shoot on single unless I need to shoot for sports or something like that. Then I just go on high plus. Just remember, if you're going on high plus, you're gonna fill up your buffer really quick and you might miss things because your buffer's trying to clear out unless you're using super high quality, fast memory cards. Self timer, pretty self-explanatory. I use a self timer if I'm shooting real estate, 2 seconds, click it, move away, let the tripod and camera do its thing. Less movement, and the 2 seconds, if you're pushing the shutter there and then removing your hands away from it, within 2 seconds, any little shake that might have happened if you're using a longer shutter speed in a darker room, for example, is gonna be gone. You do also have in there 10 seconds, 5 seconds, but I only ever use 2 seconds. And then self-timer continuous, so that is a combination of self-timer and it takes 3 images. I don't actually know what other options you got for this. 10 seconds, 5 images, 5 seconds, 3 images, 5 seconds, 5, 2, and 3. There's a bunch of different ones there, but if you need to shoot a self-timed image and you want it to fire off more than one, maybe a family portrait or something like that, that is a good option for you. And then for bracketing here, if you're shooting HDR images, that kind of thing. There's a bunch of other ones there, but I don't ever touch those. For the most part, for me, I'm only ever in single shooting. Oh, let's go back here. Bracket settings there, I don't ever use that if you want to, but I don't. We'll talk more about these later, but essentially this is how you would recall your settings. So if you have a specific set of settings assigned to the dial, you can recall them here without actually having to turn the dial. Selecting media, which memory card slot you're using as your primary one, slot 1 or slot 2. If you were to change this, you can then go and view that slot's photos or video if they are on a particular memory card. I shoot everything to 2 memory cards simultaneously, which you'll see in a little bit when we get to that setting, but the option there is to change it if you want to. Register custom shoot settings. So I've actually done a whole video covering this. So you can actually assign a button so that you click that button, and when you hold that button, it brings a particular set of settings quickly to the camera. So if you need to change between settings super fast, but then go back to another set of settings after the fact, this is a really useful feature for that. Focus mode, continuous autofocus, sorry. Bunch of different options in there as well. I'm not gonna go through what they all are. I only ever use continuous autofocus. If I'm shooting things that I need to be in manual mode, you can go manual focus too. Those are the only 2 that I use, continuous autofocus and manual focus. Priority set in AFS, balanced emphasis, and then balanced emphasis for that too. Focus area wide, you got a bunch of different options for this, and this is how the camera is going to track your focus. Depending on your personal preference, what you're shooting, you might want to change this. I only ever use wide. It's looking at my whole scene and it's trying to figure out the best thing to focus on based off of that. Sony's autofocus is renowned for being very good, and I never have any problems using wide. Now, if, say for example, you wanted to make sure that the center was just completely in focus, let's say you're shooting a wedding, straight down the aisle, you want the bride and groom to be in focus, center might be a good option for you. If there's a distraction around, someone stands up, they have to go pee in the middle of a ceremony or something like that, it might pick up them on wide. So there might be a situation when you're using center. Flexible spot is, I know I said I wasn't gonna go through these, but these are ones that sometimes I'll use depending on the situation. Most of the time it's just continuous wide. But manual flexible spot means you can control where the spot is on the screen, and whatever's in that spot is gonna be in focus, and you can specify the size as well. So you can make the size a little bit bigger, large, small, medium, if you wanted to. And then expands flexible spot as well, so a little bit around that one spot. Let's go back. Focus settings. So that is just a way to change your settings with the shutter there. So basically you're changing these settings from that menu. That I never touch. Autofocus illuminator I have set to auto. You can have it auto or off. That's the little light that fires. So if you're in a darker environment, it tries to figure out what it can focus on. Center lock on autofocus I have off. Set face priority and autofocus, I never use these. And autofocus track sensitivity, I have mine set to 3, which is the standard. So if you want it to be a lot more sensitive, like your autofocus to be a lot quicker, but sometimes it can be a little bit finicky. Like if you hold something up to the, like my hand up to the camera lens there, it's gonna focus on my hand quicker. But I find sometimes it's not always that great, so that's why I stick with standard. Autofocus system, can't even change that there. Autofocus with shutter. So what that means is, I should have muted. Okay, autofocus with shutter. What this is if you push down the shutter, it's going to focus your camera. Some people like to use this, some people don't like to use this. I personally like to use it. Pre-autofocus, I have mine set to off. Autofocus area register, I have it off. Delete registered autofocus area. I don't have anything registered, so I don't ever use those. These are really smart things that you can use, like you let the camera do all the work. I don't typically use them though. Display continuous autofocus area, have mine set to on. Autofocus micro adjustments. So if you need to calibrate your lens, I've never had to do this, this is where you'd go. Okay, now we're in exposure 1 menu, and some of these are gonna be things I just don't ever touch, and you won't likely need to either. So I'm just gonna skip over them. So that we'll leave as is. ISO is obviously pretty self-explanatory here. I don't know why you'd wanna set it in the menu here. It seems like a weird thing to have in the menu because you just control it when you're actually shooting. You're never gonna go into the menu to change your ISO, then go back to shoot. That just seems counterproductive. Autofocus minimum, standard, metering mode, I have mine set to multi. So this is how the camera judges your exposure. I always get best results on multi. Other people will say different things as well. You also have center as an option, a spot, the entire image, and then your highlights. But I just find multi for me works best. Let's go back into the menus again. Face priority in multi-metering mode I have set to on. I don't actually know face priority in multi-metering mode. There's some of these things that I genuinely don't know, and I haven't used them. I don't know everything there is about this camera. That one's on. Don't know what that does though. Spot metering point is center. Exposure step is disabled right now, but it's set to 0.3. AEL with shutter, I have mine set to auto. Exposure standard adjustment. This is one of those things that you're not really ever going to want to use, and it says that. So just cancel out of it. Flash. I don't use flash, so we're gonna skip by that. Some people are gonna say, well, you don't use on-camera flash. I don't do a lot of things where I'm actually required to use a flash. When it comes to real estate, I prefer to use natural light and just use longer shutter speeds if I need to. Some people like to use flash, have flashes in different corners of the room to really light up the room. Never been a fan of that, so I don't use flash. 12 of 14, so we're in the color white balance image processing section now. White balance, I have mine normally set to auto. When I'm filming videos inside like this in a studio environment, my lights are all set to 5600 Kelvin, which is daylight temperature, but I actually set the camera to daylight sunny. Because if you're in auto, it will move around, even in like a studio environment like this. Sometimes if you get a little bit closer, like a hand gets closer or you hold up a lens that's white, your white balance will fluctuate and it will change. So for situations where it's talking head videos, just set it to whatever you want to use. I use sunny. But outside, I normally leave it to auto. If I'm shooting a wedding, believe it or not, auto. I find 95% of the time it's pretty accurate. The only time maybe I have issues is when it starts to get darker, and venues tend to have cheaper lights, like light bulbs aren't the best, those horrible tungsten ones, that can really confuse it, and you have to then go in and manually set your white balance. Priority set in auto white balance, I have mine set to standard. DRO auto high dynamic range, I'm having a hard time talking today. I have mine set to off. I don't ever see the need to use that. Creative style. Video done entirely on this. This is how I shoot all of my videos. The color that I use is either neutral creative style or autumn leaves creative style. So there's a bunch in here. Neutral is a common one I use if you want to have a little bit of a grade, and then where's autumn leaves? Just there. Autumn leaves is the other one I use. I'll link the video above there for you to see up there. I highly recommend you try out using these, especially if you're new, especially if you've never color graded before. These will give you a really nice, good looking image just straight out the camera without having to do a lot. Picture profiles. So if you want to shoot in Cine 4, S-Log2, HLG, this is where you'd go to select. I typically don't use picture profiles. I'm kind of known for not using picture profiles. It's just not something I like to use. Less work smarter, not harder. So you can go in and you could change to Cine 4 and you can play around with all that if you wanted to. If you want to use picture profiles, I don't. 13 of 14, we're in focus assist now. Focus magnifier right now is disabled because we're in continuous autofocus, but if we change that to manual, when you turn the focus ring, it will allow you to zoom right in automatically and see exactly what's in focus, so you can literally nail your focus. Focus magnifier time, so that's how long it will stay zoomed in for, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, or no limit. I have mine set to no limit, and then when I want to just go back to my regular image, not in focus magnifier, just hit the shutter and it returns. Initial focus magnifier, you can go times 1 or times 5.9. Normally that's set to 5.9, I'm not sure why that's on 1. So that's how far it will actually zoom in. 5.9 is gonna go right in. So if you actually want to nail your focus properly, I'd recommend you use times 5.9. Autofocus in, focus magnifier on, manual focus assist on, and then peaking. So your focus peaking settings, I have peaking always on. I have mine set to mid. You can control what that is, high, mid, or low. So that's how red things are gonna be. So how much it's gonna show you is typically in focus. And then the color is red. You do have other options like yellow and white. Yellow and white I find a little bit harder to see. Red, typically I don't shoot a lot of things that are red, and even on skin tones, red's still gonna show up pretty well. So those are what I use for my focus peaking settings. Anti-flicker shoot off, face registration off, register faces priority off. All right, let's go to movie 1 of 9. Exposure mode and exposure mode, S and Q, slow and quick. Because I'm on manual exposure, I can't control those. And I would urge you to do the same, shoot most things in manual if you can. File format, this is where you control whether you want to shoot in 1080 or 4K, or if you want to go 120, you'd have to change one of these settings, then go to 120. So if we shoot in 4K, it's going to disable my monitor right now because I'm recording on the Atomos here and it won't let me record my screen if I'm going to 4K, so I'm not going to swap to it, but AVC HD is what I record my 1080p video in. AVC HD is a little bit of an older style of file format there that I wouldn't recommend that you use. And then your recording settings, you can change whatever this is. So if you want to shoot 60 frames a second, with the highest bit rate, you'd go 60p, 50 megabits. 120 frames per second, 100 megabits is for super slow motion, so 120 frames per second. And then if I'm doing just regular talking head segments like this in 1080, normally they're 4K, but if they're doing in 1080, 24p, 50 megabits, which is what I've got it set to right now. S and Q is slow and quick. Some like this, some don't like this. I prefer just to do things manually, but if you want to go in and set up things in S and Q, you can. This is how you do something like a time lapse. I just prefer to not use that. S and Q will also allow you to do super slow motion, but with S and Q, if you were to shoot that way for slow motion, you're not gonna get sound. So I would just opt to shoot with 120 frames per second from there instead. Proxy recording. If you want to get smaller, much smaller versions of the video files, so if you're shooting in 4K, but you want a proxy version, a much smaller one that you can edit with, that's where you'd turn that on. I never use that though. I don't really have any issues editing on my Mac. Autofocus drive speed, normal. Same thing again, fast or slow. How fast things are going to react in terms of the autofocus. I just have mine set to normal. Autofocus track sensitivity, again, standard. Responsive is gonna mean it's quicker, like if I held my hand up. When we were talking about that earlier, that was more for photo, but now we're talking about for video, and if I was to hold my hand up, it's gonna be quicker to respond opposed to what I have it set to right now, which is standard. Auto slow shutter on, audio recording level right now. I'm in manual exposure. I don't know why you're not allowed to change that in there. But if you need to change the levels for your mic, if your mic's too hot, typically I find it is quite hot. It's set to 15 by standard on the A7 III and all Sony cameras. I normally drop it down to between 9 and 11, and I find that's a good point for me to get good audio. Audio level display is on, so you can see, like right now with the A6400, you can't see it, but I can see the little green bars going up and down. That's your audio level display. You should always use that for video. Audio out timing is live. Wind noise reduction, I have that off. Typically, if I'm shooting in a windy environment, I'm using a dead cat or something to counteract the wind. I don't want the camera to try and do any of that for me. You might run into issues with it trying to compensate for something that actually isn't that bad. So I have that off. Marker display is on. So these are your markers. So if you want to have safe zones, you can see right here, aspect ratio zones, you can have all those controlled on here. If you want to have a point right in the middle of your center, incredibly useful for lining up things right in the middle of the framing there, have your center turned on. And then if you want to just quickly turn all those on and off, you can just do so by turning on and off. So go and have everything set up how you want. This is how I normally have it set up on 235.1, safety zone off, guide frame is off. And then when I want to have them off, all of them, you just off or on. Video light mode, power link, never use that. Movie with shutter off. Shutter steady shot, menu 4 of 9. Silent shooting, I have off. So if you are, again, at a wedding and you didn't want the shutter to make any form of a noise whatsoever, you can turn that off there. There are issues you can run into with lights and that kind of thing. I'm not going to cover it too much, but you should look into that if you are considering using silent shooting. There are pros and cons of using it. E-front curtain shutter is on. I don't know exactly what that does, to be honest with you. I think that's something to do with flash, but I'm not going to talk about it and pretend to know because I don't. Release without lens enable. So if you you use old lenses, vintage lenses, or lenses that don't have any form of communication between the lens and the body, if you have this set to off, you won't be able to shoot with the camera whatsoever. So you need to make sure that that is always turned on. I just leave it on. This means if there isn't a lens attached to the camera, you can still trigger the shutter, which when you have one of the vintage lenses on there with an adapter or adaptive mount, you can still shoot. The camera will just fire. It doesn't know that a lens is attached, but the lens is attached. So that's why you'd have that always on. Release without card means you can take pictures without a memory card being in there. Don't know why you'd ever do that, but I always have it turned on anyway, just for the sake of it. But that can throw you off sometimes because you could be taking a bunch of photos thinking you're recording to a memory card when actually you aren't. So if you don't want to run into that ever happening potentially, just turn that off. Steady shot off, and steady shot settings, I don't have it on right now. But steady shot would be if you want the camera, this is your IBIS. So if you want to use that, if you had a lens on there or something like that, it would allow you to have your steady shot on. Zoom, so clear image zoom this is for, and right now it's disabled. We're in RAW and JPEG. Okay, so if we just go back and change this to JPEG, and let's see here. Okay, so now we can access this so I can show you. So zoom, this will be your digital zoom here, so you can zoom right in. Obviously we're on a table, so you can't see that. But zoom settings, so clear image zoom, optical zoom only, or digital zoom. So optical zoom would be, you can just control the zoom. Let's say you're using, one sec, like the little kit lens that comes with the camera. This has it's called a power zoom on here. So you can actually control the zoom on the camera, and that's an optical zoom. So that will only control, or that will only work with optical zoom only. And then clear image zoom is technically digital zoom. I've done videos covering this before. It's an incredibly useful feature, but if you want to be able to use that, you have to have it turned on there. And then digital zoom is zoom past clear image zoom, but you start to lose quality, whereas with clear image zoom, you don't lose quality. So I have that always set to on because I use that a lot. Okay, let's go to the next menu. All right, we're in display order of view 1, menu 6 of 9, display button. So this will show you everything that you have available to you when you flick through your display. So let's just show you something here. So if you push up on display, it changes what is cycling through, what's available to you. So you can see all the different settings here. So let's go back to, that is the main one that I use. It has all your settings available to you on the screen so you can see everything. That's really useful. But if you don't want to be able to see some of those things, or if there's too much going on there, it's too cluttered for you, this is where you change that. So display button. So if you want to be looking through the EVF and you want to have a different set of settings available to you opposed to what's on the screen, you can do that. You can set them up manually. But in general, if we're just looking at monitor, this is everything I have on here. So display all info, no display info, histogram levels for viewfinder, monitor off. There's a bunch of things you can go through and change. It's all personal preference. Okay, zebras or zebras, depending on where you are. This just shows you what's properly exposed and what's not. I have mine set to 70. That's right around the good mark for me, I find. But I do have it turned off right now, so I don't use that all the time. Sometimes it can really throw you off, and you can have all these things flashing because the zebras are going nuts, and that can really throw you off. So sometimes I do turn it off, but it is a useful thing if you're really not too sure if your shot's properly exposed or not. Grid lines, square grid. So this is what you can see if you're taking a photo or a video on the screen there. So rule of thirds grid, so you have 3 lines, imagine like a box like this, that will be your rule of thirds. Square grid it'll be a grid, and then it goes across like this, and then diagonal in a square grid, so you got your box that way, and it's the diagonals, and then just off. Exposure set guide I have set to on. Live view display setting effect on. Did we skip one there? No, let's go back. Okay, display order of view 2, 7 of 9. Continuous shooting length not displayed, order of view 2. So when you take a picture, it's going to show you for 2 seconds on the back of the screen that photo. You can turn that off. Some people don't like to have that. You can also have it extended a little bit longer than 2 seconds. I think 2 seconds is a good, quickly look. I think they call it, what's it called? Chimping? Something like that? I don't know. But anyway, if you want to quickly view your photo, that's where you do that. Custom keys we're going to talk more about in a little bit. So we'll skip over that for now. Same with the function menu setup. Very useful things that we'll cover in a separate section. Dial setup. So your AV and your TV, these are your aperture and your shutter speed. So 2 dials obviously on the A7III there. Which one do you want to control the shutter speed and which one do you want to control the aperture? So I have my front to control my shutter speed and my back to control my aperture. If you wanted to flip those, you just tap on that and you can reverse it around the other way. You can also have it to work in reverse. So if you want to, normally with the shutter, if you scroll it to the clockwise, it will increase the shutter. But if you wanted to have that reverse, so you're scrolling it clockwise and it decreases your shutter because your mind works backwards, then you could do that if you wanted to, but I don't know why or who would ever do that. Okay, custom operation 2, 9 of 9, movie button always on, lock operational parts off, audio signals off. That's that little beep. Those annoying Sony beeps. You focus on something, if you're going through your menus, you get beeps. Turn that off. That's the first thing you should turn off when you get your camera. Just straight away, turn that off. This is your settings. So we're in network 1, menu 1 of 2 now. This is where you would do things to control, send things to your phone, that kind of thing. So send to smartphone function, send to computer, FTP transfer. If you were somewhere in the media, let's say you're at the Olympics for the media, FTP transfer is how they'd quickly transfer the images, get them to the cloud, to Reuters or wherever they're going, and the images are available. That's how you can do it quickly that way. Control with a smartphone. So if you want to use your smartphone as a remote, and then airplane mode. So if you were on a plane and you were taking pictures, you should have your camera set to airplane mode. This will turn off all the network communication. So your Wi-Fi, your Bluetooth on the camera there, you can just turn that on. That will also save you some battery too if you want to get the most out of your battery. Just to show you, you can control what you send. So if you want to send the original, the proxy and the original there, and then send to computer, you can select which memory card you want to send, like those kinds of things. So let's just go back. Menu 2, Wi-Fi settings, Bluetooth settings. I'm not going to go into all this because, to be honest with you, I very, very rarely ever go into this. Wi-Fi, you might go in the very first time to connect your camera to your home Wi-Fi, but that's pretty much it. Playback. I don't ever really use these options, to be honest with you. Don't ever use these ones either. Select playback media, pretty self-explanatory, using slot 1 or slot 2 when it comes to viewing what's on the memory cards. Again, I shoot everything simultaneously to both, so it's always going to be a copy on both cards, so I don't really worry about that too much. You can specify what you actually view there if you wanted to. I don't think I've ever been into that menu. Image jump setting means you can control when you're viewing your images how you're flipping through them. So if you organize your images on your camera, you have them starred, you have them rated, you can flip through them that way if you wanted to. All right, setup 1. So I can tell you that my monitor brightness is set to sunny weather for most of the time. I do find, and I've talked about this before, that the screen on the A7 III isn't the best, so I don't trust it that much. For the most part, in really, really bright days, I'm just using it for composition. I will check my exposure using a histogram or going through the EVF, which I can trust. Viewfinder brightness and finder color temperature, I've never changed those. I can't even access them right now, but I've never changed them. Gamma display assist. So if you were shooting with a picture profile, this is almost like the camera adds a lot to you so you can see pretty much what it's gonna look like. So if you were to go in here, you see there's one for S-Log2, S-Log3, HLG, Rec 709. So there's a bunch of different ones on there. And I think the only one I've ever really used is HLG 709 if I was shooting in HLG, which I've tried around and I didn't love. You can have it set to off. You can get the camera to automatically detect what mode you're in or what picture profile you're using and it will do it for you. Or you just select it manually. But for me, because I don't shoot with picture profiles, that's always off. All right, what do we got next? Volume settings. So how loud the volume is when outputting if you're playing back a video clip on the camera, that's what that is. Delete, confirm, cancel first. Have that set because you don't want to go in and accidentally delete images or video from there. So have that on there. Okay. Setup 2, menu 2 of 7 in this. Display quality, have mine set to high, higher or standard. This will use a little bit more battery. I just prefer everything set to high. You want to use the highest quality out of the screen and the EVF there. Power save time, 5 minutes, so it's going to turn the camera off after 5 minutes. You can have that set to more if you want to. I find 5 minutes is the sweet spot. I'm never not really using the camera for 5 minutes, so if that's the case, I just do it myself. But if I forgot, it will turn itself off. Auto power off temperature. So a lot of people say they have problems with overheating with the A7 III. I've never personally had any, but one way you can get yourself the most or the longest amount of time if you're recording in a hot environment is to have this set to high. Having that set to standard, if you were in a super hot environment and you did have problems with the A7 III overheating, and it's going to turn itself off at a lower temperature than if you had it set to high. So you can see right there, the temperature of the device may rise to prioritize recording time. Would you like to change this setting? Yes. This should be one of those things you just turn on automatically. It's not damaging the camera, it's an option that's available to you, you should just turn it on. NTSC or PAL, so if you're shooting for Europe or Japan or North America, that's where you'd be selecting NTSC or PAL instead. Quick note, if you click on one of these and you change it, it actually powers off your camera and changes a bunch of your settings. So you can't just quickly swap between the two. So if you are needing to change, just make sure you go back and check all your settings after the fact. Cleaning mode, performs auto image sensor cleaning. I'm not going to do that right now because we're recording, but it's there if you want to. Touch operation on, so the touch screen becomes, I don't want to say useful because it's useless as a touchscreen, but if you want to, you can use it. So for touchpad panel settings, even though it is useless, I have mine set to touchpad only. And then if you want to control the settings, so the way this will work is if you want to use your touchscreen to control the focus point on the screen, this is what you can control there. So you can get it to be just one part of the screen or the whole screen, and you can have it set to wherever your thumb is becomes like that point, and then you can move around from there. It's kind of hard to explain, but I would recommend having it set to relative position. Demo mode, if this camera was in a shop on demo mode, that's what you'd be using there. Time code settings, so I have mine just set to counter. If you want to have it so you can be triggered from an Atomos Ninja 5 or another recorder, you want to be using time code here, and you want to make sure it's set to rec run so that it can trigger from between the two there. And then remote control, I have mine set to off. HDMI settings, HDMI resolution auto, 24p, 60p output, I have mine set to 24p. HDMI info display, I have mine set to on. Time code output on, rec control on. So that's again another setting that you're gonna be using so that the Atomos Ninja can trigger recording, or can be triggered for recording, sorry. That's a big one you're gonna use there. And then control for HDMI, I have mine set to on. 4K output selection, I can't even control. USB connection, I have mine set to PC remote. A lot of these, you know what? Like, we don't need to go through all these settings because these aren't gonna be settings that are gonna be benefiting your creativity anyway. These are gonna be things that you might use once and then that's it. Like date time setting. I don't need to tell you that to set up your settings for your date and time. Copyright info, if you wanna add that on there, you wanna add your name into the copyright information for the EXIF data. Area setting, I'm in Toronto, technically, which is New York. Format your memory card there. A button that, I don't like that placement of that. It's just randomly buried. But at the same time, I like it there because it's hard to find and it's not easy to format your card. File numbers, series of numbers. So every time you set a bunch of new photos, you take a bunch of new photos, you reset your memory card. Do you want it to continue or do you want it to start again from 1? So I have mine set to just series, and then file name. You can specify the file name there. As you see, it puts that at the beginning of the file name. Record media settings. So this is what I was talking about earlier. So this is where if you want to have, let's say, memory card 1 just record a video, memory card 2 just photos, you can specify all that. So I always have slot 1 as the main one, and slot 1 is the fast card slot anyway. So that's what I'd recommend you do. Recording mode simultaneously records photo. So you see the little symbols there, photo, and then the other one is video. Records both of those simultaneously to both cards. I also have auto switch on. So if you were recording with just fill up memory card 1 first. Once that fills up, it moves to memory card 2. You can do that if you want to. So you see here you have simultaneous photo to both, video to both. There's a bunch of different settings that you can go through, but if you want everything to be like safely backed up, I would recommend using the settings that I use right here. It prioritizes everything to memory card 1, but it creates a copy and sends that to memory card 2. And this is just the safest way, especially if you're doing any paid work, to make sure your footage is backed up. You're never gonna touch that, touch these. Display media info, I don't think I've ever gone into that. And then this tells you about your version for your firmware, settings reset, and you have a My menu there. You can add quick menu selections too if you want to. If there's certain things you go in that are kind of random, that are buried deep, you can add them into your My menu there to quickly access them. So that is all the A7 III settings in terms of what's in the menus. Now let's talk a little bit about custom buttons and the function button. So this is ways to speed up how to use the camera, swap between different modes quickly and easily when you're out on a shoot, on the fly, out and about, and you don't have to go deep into the settings to change things. You can just push a custom button or go into your function menu and change things that way. So if you're not familiar, there's an FN button right here. This is your function button. If you click on that, you'll see it brings up 12 settings. There's 2 rows of 6. And you'll see here that I have auto white balance there, audio recording, creative styles, picture profiles, focus area. I don't need to go through them all. You can change these to be whatever you want, which I'll show you how to do in a second. But the nice thing with this is you can quickly change something. So you push the function. Let's say I want to change the white balance. You've got 2 ways to change it. If you click on it, you can just go through and select. Alternatively, you can hover over it, and now you have 2 other ways to change it. You can use the D-pad wheel to scroll through. You can also use the shutter dial on the front and just quickly scroll through it that way as well. So let's say I don't know, I need to change my creative style. Let's just go to Vivid. And it's as simple as that. So that's a really quick and easy way to actually change settings in the function menu. And as I said, these are completely changeable. You can change these to be whatever you want. And to do that, go into your menu, go to tab 2, menu 8 of 9. You'll see there's a function menu set up there. If you click on that, you'll see now you have 1 and 2. 1 is the upper set of settings and 2 is the lower set of settings. So if we click on function upper 1, actually let's just go back here. So you'll see function upper 1 right here is currently white balance. If we go to the menus and go function menu set, function upper 1 is currently white balance. Let's change it to wireless flash. Now let's go back, function, you'll see now it's wireless flash. So that's quick and easy to change if you need to change what's in the list there. Let's just change that back because I don't want to have wireless flash there. Change it back to white balance, and now you'll see it's white balance again. So that is the function menu, a really quick and easy way to throw in there whatever you want, things that you change on a very regular basis, and quickly change things in the camera. Really useful tip for you. Now the other customizable thing that people generally like Sony cameras for is that it technically has 4, but really 3 custom buttons that I use. Custom 1, Custom 2, Custom 3, and Custom 4 is right here. I tend not to talk about Custom 4 too much, the C4 button, because it's also the trash button to delete images. If you're new, yes, there's a C4 next to it, but it also has a trash can icon on there, so it can get a little confusing. So I would avoid using the C4 button unless you really need the extra button. You can customize the other buttons on the camera as well, but again, it can get a little confusing. If you change something to something that the icon says it isn't, that can be quite confusing. So in general, I just leave my settings pretty much how they are out the box for the back of the camera here. My up is the display, so it just cycles through the different options you have there. The left is for controlling my drive mode, single shot, high speed shot, and right is for my ISO. However, I have my camera set up a little bit better for ISO. The wheel on the D-pad here, I actually have that to control my ISO. And then on the front, my shutter speed is the dial there. And then on the back, the aperture is right here. If the lens has an aperture ring, obviously you can control it that way. But 3 dials, front, shutter speed, back, aperture, D-pad dial is for my ISO. That means 3 fingers, I can control those 3 main settings, which is the main ones I control on a regular basis. Quick on the fly changes. That's a really good way to set up, and that's what I would recommend. Now the actual custom buttons themselves, if we go into the same menu we're just in, so tab 2, 8 of 9, you'll see you've got custom keys there for photography, video, and for playback. Now you can set up the camera, set up the A7 III so that if you're in a photo mode, you'll have one set of custom keys. And then if you go to video, you have the same keys, but they do different things, which can get a little confusing. So when you start off, you might not want to have it set up like that, but just to show you how I have mine set up. So for photography, control wheel is ISO, custom button 1 is focus mode, custom button 2 is to swap between full frame and aps-c or crop mode, custom 3 is for bright monitoring, and custom 4 is to select my finer or my monitor. And that basically forces the camera to either have my EVF on, my screen on, because sometimes if you're looking at the screen and using the screen to view what's going on, but you get too close to the EVF, it will turn off the screen, and that's annoying. So that's why I have custom button assigned to physically force the screen to be the only method sometimes. And if we go to custom key for video now, you'll see that there's 2 that are slightly different. Now I've left one as follow custom here. Follow custom means that whatever setting you have for photo, which is like your anchor settings, your base settings, the video setting will follow that. So custom key for custom button 1 in photography is bright monitoring. So in video, it's technically going to do the same thing. So you can set it up that way, or you can change it to something else. Let's just say I'm going to change custom 3 to what I normally have it set to, which is zoom. And I have my zoom assigned as clear image zoom. So now if I was to push custom button 3, that will enable clear image zoom. So I can go crop mode, clear image zoom, get a bunch more zoom, and it's winning. Good. So that is how you change your custom keys. I don't ever touch the playback. I don't need to. That's my settings in case you wanted to see it. And just to quickly show you again, that's my custom keys for photography, and then in 2, and then in 3. Oh yeah, my AEL and my AF on, I have assigned to IAF and focus hold, and the focus hold button, I have assigned to IAF as well. On certain lenses, especially like, you're not gonna be able to see it, on this lens here, it actually has a button, and you can assign that button to do something else too. I normally assign that to IAF or focus hold. So that is custom keys in a nutshell. Pretty straightforward to change them. As I said, if you're new, I would recommend you set whatever you want in photography and leave it the same, or follow custom for video, because it can just get a little bit overwhelming. You might be wondering why things aren't how you think they should be, and it's because you're in a different mode. So that is a real basic guide to custom buttons and how to change them. Finally, let's talk about how you can utilize the dial here to control your camera in a very powerful way to allow you to quickly swap between complete sets of settings. Now I've done a whole video on this before, and I'm not going to cover it in a great amount of detail, but essentially there's 4 main things that I use this camera for. Manual mode for photography, so all my photos are taken in manual mode. 1 is for 120 frames per second video. 2 is for 4K video, 24 frames per second. And then the video mode I use for 24 frames per second, 50 megabit, 1080p video. And the reason I have it set up like that is those are things that I use on a very regular basis, and I like to just turn the dial and be able to swap between those modes. Now it's really easy to assign a set of settings to one of those numbers, so 1, 2. Video is always going to be video mode, manual is always going to be manual mode, and you can actually record video in manual mode as well. It's just you have a little bit more of a limited set of settings opposed to being in an actual video mode. Manual mode is always going to be like a photography based mode. You want to use video for 1, 2, or your video mode. So if we're in manual like we're in right now, whatever the settings are right here are going to be what I'm taking my pictures in. If we swap to 1, which is my 120 frames per second video settings, you can see everything on the screen there. If I just tap the center button, that basically brings up those settings. It's a confirmation we want to use those. If we want to go and change those, let's just change it so you can actually see that's what we're in. If we want to go and change those, let's just say all we're going to do is change 120 frames per second to 24p 50 megabits. Now you would normally change your shutter speed and everything like that too. If you need to change your base ISO, you can do that. But we're just going to change it so that it's 24 frames per second. What you now do is go to tab 1, go across to menu 3 of 14, click on memory, and you'll see now that you have all the options available. Whatever one we click on, it's going to assign the new settings that you currently have on the camera to that number. So let's just tap on 1. You see it says registered. Now if we flip back to manual, or which is photography, and then go back to 1 again, you'll now see that we're shooting 24 frames per second, 50 megabit video. So it's as simple as that to change the settings on your dials, and you can do that for all of them. Manual, 1, 2, whatever you want to assign the dials to be, you can do so by just using what I just showed you there. Any settings you have in the camera, you save it, it registers to 1 or 2, you change to that dial, it will pull all those settings. The great thing about this is it's a really quick way to swap between modes. So you can have your camera set up for one specific set of, I don't know, you're shooting something, and then you want to change it so you're shooting something else. Normally you have to go and change all the settings. You can just turn the dial and it quickly pulls up that settings, and you don't have to go in and manually change everything. So it's a really quick, easy way to change everything on the fly. So that is custom dials and how you can utilize those to improve your workflow. So there we go, that is how I set up my A7 III for photo, for video, as a hybrid shooter, someone that shoots both. If I've missed something, and I'm sure I have, just pop a comment down below and I'll try my best to respond to everybody and help you out if you need to. But I just wanted to have this video as a, if you just picked up this camera, or you've just moved to Sony and you're really not sure how to set up your camera, or a good way to set it up, or how I set it up, this should have covered everything pretty much in a good amount of detail. So I hope you got some value from it. Otherwise, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. See you later.